For more than 100 years, radio has been a tool, a lifeline, a constant companion. Over the next 2 weeks, I'll be scratching the surface of what radio in its various forms means to us, with islanders who've devoted themselves to this unique medium. Our conversation continues this week with former engineer and senior producer at Manx Radio, Charlie Webster.
In 1965, I joined the station in 65. It was Easter 65 when I joined. And the station was owned then by a chap called Richard Mayer, who was very successful out in South Africa with large radio stations. And he joined forces with Pye of Cambridge to set up a station on the Isle of Man. And he had a vision of a most high-powered station which would cover the whole of the United Kingdom and Europe, because the Isle of Man was unique, as you know, in those days. And he arrived. T.H. Colburn was partly responsible as well. There's a photograph of the caravan arriving and T.H. Colburn on the caravan going past the grandstand. And it was completely new to the island. All we had in those days was 3 papers, I think, Mona's Herald, Times and Examiner. Manx Radio arrived. Boy, we had the boys in Ramsey, Caroline, the wonderful station. They used to come into the station, our station, on a Wednesday for a cup of tea and coffee and everything else, so we'd share stories. But to let you know how successful it was in the early days, there was a chap called George Ridgway who had a jeweller shop in Strand Street. And a salesman went down and said to George, "You want to advertise?" He said, "It's £1 for 30 seconds. And George said, "OK, I'll go for that." And the first advert went out, I say it was a Monday morning. George was outside his shop that lunchtime, and he couldn't believe how many people came past and said, "Heard your advert on the radio." And he suddenly realised then that the Manx people were in love with their own radio station. You know, in those days, I mean, if you lost your dog or your cat, in those days, there was nothing. But when Manx Radio came along, we were inundated with people losing their cats and their dogs and their budgies and everything else. And one of the most successful things on the radio in those early days was the obituaries, the obituary notices. People used to tune in to see who'd passed away. It's unbelievable, really. But the Isle of Man was an exciting time for radio. It was wonderful. And then we did our first TT races. Again, we were blackballed from the BBC. We couldn't get into the grandstand because the ACU had control of the grandstand, and we had to put a commentary box up in the grave in the cemetery, for a cemetery, a huge 20-foot green commentary box, and that's where we were sighted. Now, we weren't given any official times whatsoever. We were told, "You're on your own. You're not really welcome, really." Anyway, Peter Neal, who was then the sports editor, his mate was a fellow called Arthur Quinney, who was the trade union representative. But Arthur was the chief timekeeper at the grandstand. And he said to Peter, "Don't you worry," he said, "I'll give you the times. If you get Webster to stand after the first lap below where I am, the window, I'll throw an envelope out with the times." So that was my job the first year, waiting for the envelope to drop down and give it to Peter. Peter would say, unofficially, "The times are so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so." Then the BBC would come on and say at the same time. They couldn't understand how we were working it out so accurately. So even to put commentary boxes up, we went to Ballaugh and put a commentary box up in the forecourt because the BBC had the prime site on the bridge. And we had awful trouble again. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that the BBC decided that, you know, Manx Radio was here to do a job and it was time for them to leave. Now, in those days, we had 4 commentary boxes of commentaries. We had Ballacrane, Ballaugh Bridge, we had a telephone chap in Parliament Square, and we had the Great Ian Canal on the bungalow. And there was only 2 engineers, Ewan Lehman and myself, and we handled everything. And my job in race days was to go up 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning with the equipment in a little van up to the bungalow. Had to wire everything in because we couldn't leave it overnight in case someone pinched it. Climb over a fence, put the big 12-volt batteries, big mixers in, get it all set up. Then go from there down through Thalty Will, down to the Raven in in Ballaugh, and George Lehman was there. He was the landlord, and we had a commentary box in his front room upstairs. Now George was wonderful at night at 8:30 in the morning, but he used to do a lot of work for the Coast Guard, and he'd come home better for the worst at lunchtime. And this particular time, Jeff Cannell was in the commentary in the front room. I was there because we had problems with the landline kept breaking for some other reason. And the race had started. Peter Neal said Haywood's on his way and Aggo's on his way, he'd be behind. And they just gone through Ballacren, and George Lehman came into his lounge, completely out of it, smashed out of his head, and said, "Who's in my front room? Get out of here." And Jeff said to me, "Get him out." I said, "Well, I'll try." He said, "Well, knock him out." I said, you can't do that. He said, if I could because in those days we only had a short lead on the headphones, so Jeff couldn't actually walk over. Otherwise, I think he would have knocked him out. Anyway, I eventually got him out and got him in the bedroom just before Haywood and Aggo arrived. But that was an exciting day. Mm-hmm. And then in the morning after Ballaugh, I had to go down to Ballacren then and put the equipment in there, and then stay there for about half an hour to make sure that everything was working all right. Then go back to the grandstand, be on standby there. Ewan he did all the mixing and everything. And then my job then at lunchtime was to go down to the Waverley Chippy to get the fish, chips and peas. It was very important to get the fish, chips and peas. And I said to Arthur, who used to run the Chippy, I said, when you hear the fanfare, get the chips wrapped up because I'll be straight down and straight back. So it was a very exciting time, the TT week. Wonderful. We had no talkback in the commentary positions. Oh no, there's no such thing as talkback. You used to have to say over to Balafo, over to so-and-so, so-and-so. And when we were checking the lines, we had a telephone, a handset with a little battery on. And I'd plug it onto the landline. You would be at the grandstand. And I had to go... And you'd say, "Yeah, I can just about hear you, so everything's working all right." Well, there was no talkback. There was nothing fancy in those days. It was all good fun.
When Manx Radio moved from the caravan down to the promenade, is that right?
That's right.
You were instrumental in creating those studios.
You and I built those. Mm-hmm. And when I started on the Monday, and then I didn't go in on the Saturday or the Sunday. And on the Monday, I was back at work again. And John Greason said, "Have you been ill?" I said, "No, why?" He said, "Well, you weren't here Saturday and Sunday." I said, "Well, I thought we were..." "Oh, no," he said, we're working right the way through to get the studios all up and running and as quick as possible. He never got paid any extra overtime. He was expected to do it. And the big money earning in those days was the religious programmes, which we used to put on at 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock. And you had to do that once a week. I'll tell you the rota. 1 week, you'd get up at 5:30. You'd go up to the caravan, because it was still there. The VHF transmitter was there. You had to put that on to put Snaefell on. Then you had to go out to Foxdale, put the medium wave on. You come back to the studio. You put a tone up to make sure the transmitters were all fired up. You'd have a cup of tea. And then you'd have to go out to Foxdale again, because in those days we could only broadcast 188 in before sunrise, and had to go off at sunset. So you had to go out then to put the 188 off and put the 232 on. Then you go home for your breakfast. Then you'd work all the way through. And then at 4:30 you'd go out to Foxdale and you put the 232 off, and then you put the 188 on. And then you go back to the studio and you put the religious tapes on till 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, switch off, up to the caravan again to put the transmitter there for Snaefell off. Out to Foxdale to put the 188 off, and the time is your own. And that was 1 week on and 1 week off.
Gosh, and to think we're just sat at home flipping a switch and listening to the output.
You've got it easy these days. But it was still very exciting, you know. I mean, when there was a snowfall, you know, people would wake up, you'd be able to tell them the schools were not open or the buses were running late. And this was totally new to the Isle of Man. I mean, we were very lucky with the first commercial station in the country, licensed anyway.
being involved with the station from so early on, you must have seen the difference it made to the Isle of Man as a community, being able to communicate like that.
Oh, yes. Yes, I mean, the general election in those days, before we started, you'd have to wait till the next day for the paper to come out. So I introduced the first election programme, and Terry Kringle was the questionnaire. We had to do it in government office around a table, and each member had 2 minutes to talk about what they wanted to do, and then it was a bit of a free-for-all. But everything had to be timed on a stopwatch. And then the night of the election, we had different people out in different places. That's an interesting thing. Some of these halls, even today, they're using, I mean, they're really beyond it. I mean, the one at Andrea's, I mean, there's a little shed at the back of the school there, you know, where they're having the results. We used to have to put a landline in there. We put a landline in the Laxey Workmen's Institute. We put another landline into the St Paul's Church in Ramsey. We put a landline in Ballaugh Village Hall. Mm-hmm. Peel was in the police station. Mm-hmm. And then Douglas had their various ones.
Mm-hmm. And what difference do you think it made to people's lives to have access to that information so readily?
Well, I mean, as Roger said in this previous programme, I mean, we had an 80% penetration, so everybody loved it. You know, we were their radio station, and everybody appreciated. I mean, the programmes in those days were purely, really music. We used to get the news from the Examiner. I think it was the Examiner. I'd have to go up we had a push bike. We used to drive ride from the promenade up to the Times office, which is then in Myrtle Street, and get the news. But it was just a basic news because they kept the best for themselves. Obviously, they weren't going to give us, you know, a leading story which they're going to use the next day. So that was, and I always remember at Christmas time, Terry Kringle and Alan Bell looking at the script saying, that'll do us for Boxing Day. We'll keep that in the drawer. And they always had a drawer full of little stories which they could come out. To go out and do a Christmas recording of a Christmas service, I mean, you had a huge, big, what you call photographs, you know, and they were huge, big, really heavy, you know, and then the mixer would be a channel mixer, and you'd have the 12-inch tapes, and you set all that up. And I mean, this studio here now, you see, what I miss here now is there's no turntables, and there's no tape recorders, you know. No. There's no records all stacked up, all the carts for the commercials where you had to pull a card out and put it into a little machine and hit it on whatever you wanted. That was all manual.
What kind of effect do you think it's had on us? I mean, as radio producers and presenters, and to the listener as well, that change, that sort of switch to digital, where it's a different world, really.
Oh, it's a different world altogether. I remember Stuart Lord was the early morning presenter, and he used to say, I'm hungry, I hadn't had my breakfast, and I could do with a cup of coffee and some toast. And people would arrive at the station on the promenade with toast and coffee. Oh, yes, there was no question about that. Oh, yes. And another thing, in the summertime, we were very, very lucky because we had a tourist industry in those days where people would come for a week or a fortnight, and we had this Scottish fortnight where all the people from Scotland would come over. And the Villa Marina would have a show on every night. And the Gaiety Theatre would have a show. On a Sunday night, we'd have guests coming in from Blackpool, because Blackpool would play around. I've met the Bachelors, Lesdos, Little and Large, the Two Ronnies. They all used to come into the station in the Sunday afternoon for an interview. I always remember Morecambe and Wise. They came into the studio, and Morecambe said to the other chap, he said, "This is the first time we've ever been interviewed in a telephone box, because there was only small art studios down there, not like this here, only very tiny." So we met all those sort of people.
You're listening to The Power of Radio with me, Sarah Hendy, where over the next 2 weeks we'll be exploring what radio means to us as individuals, as a society, and in particular as islanders. Former engineer and senior producer at Manx Radio, Charlie Webster, is our guest this week.
The first Remembrance Sunday we did live from the Villa Marina, and I was radio. You have to picture, you have to talk and put the picture into the people's eyes. And the maroon was going to go off in 11, and I said to you, we really want to hear this bang on the radio. So I put a microphone right down by the bin where this rocket was inside. And it went off at 11 o'clock. Bang, we already heard it on the radio, all right. 2 minutes silence lasted about 5 hours. It had blown the transmitter sky high, because in those days we had no what's called compression to handle the quality of the sound coming down the line. Anyway, people were phoning up and saying, I know there's a 2 minute silence, but this is absolutely ridiculous. This has gone on for 5 hours. And another time great idea, I went to the sale room and bought a second-hand kettle. And in those days, the sale room was in Athol Street, Harry Johnson's sale room. And I bought this kettle for our OBs. So first time I used it was at St John's for the Timble ceremony. See? Everything was put in, all the cables on the hill, cables in the church, because we used to have a commentator in the church as well. Louise Quirk used to be in the church talking about the women's fashions and the hats they were wearing, you see. So, and they had this big green box, had the kettle, had the tea bags, the milk. About 10:20, governor's arriving at 11, and the governor arrives at 11. It is 11. So I said to you, do you fancy a cuppa? Oh, yes. I plugged the kettle in, started the steam, and then you just went, bang. What's that? Opened the fuse box. There's nothing there, no fuses, just a plug. Where's the fuses? Well, Mac will know. Well, where's Mac? He's just gone to Douglas. Mac was the builder from St John's. Panic stations. The battery's only going to last 10 minutes. Now the governor's on its way. Anyway, Mac arrived back and we grabbed him and he said, where are the fuses for this circuit? He said, they're in the choir, in the church. So we managed to get up there, repair the fuse, and the broadcast started at 11. So I thought that was in the July. Come September, there's the International Car Rally on, and we're based in the Sefton Hotel. So I thought, I'll bring the kettle. So I bring the kettle again. See? And we're in the bedroom next to the control room, Neil Hansen and his boys. And about 5 o'clock, it was getting dark, so put the kettle on. Just came to the boil again. Boom! Lights in the corridor goes out. Neil Hansen comes running in. The kettle is now steaming. Before he got in, I managed to get my foot and just shoved it under the bedclothes, under the bit of the thing. And Hansen come in. He said, "Have you used that kettle again?" I said, "No, I haven't done anything." That was another disaster. Trying to find where the fuses were in the Sefton Hotel for that corridor.
What other memories do you have of those golden moments where maybe things went wrong? Or
I remember doing a sports programme. I said to Peter, the final should do it outside. I used to do them in the studio. I said, well, let's get hold of St George's Hall. Let's have it there. Get an audience, get all the people together. Oh, that's all right, yes, right. So he was on the stage with the two teams either side, and we had a timekeeper and a judge. And I was down recording. And I had in those days, you had really heavy cans, really heavy things on your head, you see. And it was quite loud. And Peter said to one, what should the referee do to an awkward player? And I turned to a fellow called Wally McAvoy and I said, if I was him, I'd put my foot right up his arse. And I thought I was whispering, but of course the whole place heard this. So I had to apologise.
Oh, bless you, fellas. Well, I mean, if there are any other stories you want to share about funny little memories or anything, well, as long as you want. But if there's any other little ones, then yeah, chuck them in there.
At Foxdale, where the transmitters were out there, the grass used to grow very high. So without paying anybody, I went to see Peter Quay, the farmer, and I said, if you cut the hay, keep it down, you just take the grass. Oh, that's fine. He said, I'm happy doing that. So it worked for a couple of years, and then one year he sent his father down who had a bad neck, and he couldn't turn very well, and he was on the tractor. It was an August bank holiday weekend, and I was out with Ewan. Ewan was doing something, And I was in the transmitter hall, and the father was cutting the grass with this, with a machine. And he was going a bit fast. I said to you, now, I think he should slow down a bit. So you said, oh, well, let him go on, he's happy. Anyway, the next minute was an almighty bang. Almighty bang. One of the aerials, he'd cut one of the guy wires, and it went doo, 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 doo. And all the three of us just beheld it, and it jumped off its insulator, and it's now about 45 degrees on a slope. So I came out, and the old guy said, can't you straighten it? I said, it's not as simple as that, Mr. Quay, really. It's going to be a big job. He said, I better go home and tell Peter then. So he gets home, and Peter said, you finished early, Father? He said, I've just pulled the mast down. He said, you couldn't pull one of them down. So he jumped in the car and came up the top of the road and said, good God, there it is. And Peter Quay on the Tuesday morning, because it was bank holiday Monday, he went in to see the insurance chap. He's a very nice little man, apparently. And he said, now, Mr. Kay, don't worry. He said, you're insured. You will pay your premiums every year. What's the problem? He said, my father's just taken one of Manx Radio's masts down in the field.
So did they lose service in that part of the island for a while?
Well, we lost a bit of service because the two masts were in phase of one another. So, yeah.
Oh, dear.
But,
oh, gosh. That's terrible. But,
so we went up to Snaefell one time.
Yeah.
It used to be a race from Blackpool Tower, the top of Snaefell. People come by boat, fly in, and everything else. Anyway, the opening day the was going to be started off by a chap who Heineken, I think it was Heineken, sponsored the broadcast and the competition. Top of Snaefell, right, okay. I said to the guy, "Will you just crack open a can of lager because get the effects?" There was another fellow standing beside me, so Peter Neal said, and welcome, and now we're just going to start the race off by a can of lager opening. And this fellow said, God, it's flat, that.
Not the dramatic start you were looking for.
Not really, no. And then we interviewed the station master one time. He said, what do you do on a wet day, Henry? Oh, he said, we take all the postcards out and read them out of the post box. I said, you can't say that. Our first chief engineer was a chap called Jack Rutter, and he decided that we should have an OB van to go out and do outside broadcasts. So he'd found one in Reading, in London. He said to me, you're coming with me to London next week. We're going to pick this vehicle up and take it to Liverpool. It was TT week before the races. So I thought, oh, trip to London, that's all right, So get on the plane, go to Ronald's Way. Right, he said, what are you having to drink? I said, oh, have a beer. Because he said, we're on expenses now, he said, official trip and everything. So we got to Reading, we had to stay in this hotel. Next morning we got the train out to somewhere. And the guy said to Rutter on the phone, I'll be there at 10 o'clock with the vehicle. So I'm standing there, and I've never seen anything like it. It was a 1939 ambulance, army ambulance. It had the crosses on the side. And I thought, good God, he hasn't bought this, has he? So the guy arrived. Jack gave him the check. He went, he had a lovely big white Jaguar. And our first thing it did, we had to find a phone box to phone and give the registration for the insurance people. And I always remember we were going down somewhere like Prospect Hill, and Jack put his foot on the brake and nothing happened. We just went straight past. If a policeman would have been standing there, we'd have taken him out. And I thought, God, we've got to go up to Liverpool in this. So that afternoon we were driving along, and we came past this pub, and it was sort of serving afternoon teas outside on the lawn. And Rutter said, he said, I think we'll have a pot of tea and some sandwiches. So we pulled in. People were looking at this to say, is it going to some film industry, a set or something? Anyway, had tea and sandwiches, got back in. Wouldn't start. AA. They came out, opened the bonnet. He said, these plugs haven't. And the guy said when we picked it up, it's been fully serviced. the plugs are all knackered, so they put new plugs in. So they got us going. And then we got just outside Liverpool. Managed to pull into a garage. I can still see his mechanics looking to see, what on earth is this coming through the door here? It was dreadful. Had no lights. Didn't have any lights on it. When we got it back here, you had to put it into a Mulcrease, and they put lights on it and service it all. Jack suddenly realised what he'd gone and done, and he said, you better hide that vehicle. I said, where are we going to hide? He said, take it out to Foxdale, because there's a lot of Christmas trees out there. He said, hide it behind some of the trees. So we went out, stuck it behind the trees. A couple of weeks later, Richard Mayer said, why are you boys claiming petrol when we've got an OB vehicle? Oh, I said, it's not suitable for what we're doing. He said, well, can I come and see it? So he saw it immediately. Oh, he said, it'll have to be sold. Take it for scrap. So we had to drive it then and back to Mulcrease. And the chap I was with, he said, it's a shame to have all this petrol going in the tank going to waste. He said, I think we better cycle some of it off. So he did do. We got to the quarter bridge and ran out of petrol. I won't go into any more detail.
Thank you to my guest this week, former engineer and senior producer at Manx Radio, Charlie Webster, for his memories of radio through the years. Listen back to this programme on demand or download the podcast at manxradio.com, and join me again next Tuesday at 5:30 when I'll be discovering more about this magical medium in The Power of Radio.